We're with Neal Bolton. He is our presenter today for the Process Improvement Masterclass Series. Thanks for joining us today, Neal.
Oh, you bet. My pleasure.
Now, Neal, I guess my first question would be what does this mean, process improvement?
Well, everything that we do in any activity, whether we have a factory or a waste facility or a construction project, the tasks that we do are just part of a larger process. And when we talk about process improvement, what we're talking about really is how to evaluate each small piece of the process and make them more efficient. And so we can get into some details later, but essentially we're looking at the process of any repetitive activity and trying to make it more efficient, trim it down to its basic core efficiency.
Now, what do you suppose an attendee will take away from this Process Improvement Masterclass series?
Well, the key thing that they're going to get is a new perspective. We all do our job the same way that we learned to do it whenever we started, and we spend more time thinking about other things than what the real job is. What are we actually doing? What are those repetitive tasks we do every day? And so when someone goes through this class, they're going to get a good feel for how to look at their job, or the job that, let me back up. They're going to get a feel for how their job can be most efficiently done. They're going to get a new perspective in terms of how they utilize equipment or labor or any process, any materials. The main takeaway is just a new perspective on how to look at their processes.
Now, let me get a little bit specific here, Neal. What are some of the benefits of applying your process improvement techniques to a company's waste management operations?
Well, that's a good question. The key with waste management operations, as opposed to, maybe a large construction project, is the repetitiveness of the tasks that we perform in the waste management business. Like a factory where we're building the same thing day after day, in the waste business, if we're operating a material recovery facility, a recycling facility, we're going to be doing the same processes over and over again. We talked about collections. If you have a collections operation where you're driving a garbage truck down the street and you're picking up cans off the curb, that truck may pick up 1,000 cans a day or 250,000 lifts per year. When you have that kind of a repetitive process, like we see in the waste industry, there is a huge potential savings there, because we get to multiply any savings on that process by thousands or hundreds of thousands of times per year. So we can get a pretty, what's the right word I want to say? So when we do that, we can get a very dramatic cumulative effect through saving a little bit on a lot of different tasks.
Now, what do you suppose an attendee will take away from this Process Improvement Masterclass series?
Well, the key thing that they're going to get is a new perspective. We all do our job the same way that we learned to do it whenever we started, and we spend more time thinking about other things than what the real job is. What are we actually doing? What are those repetitive tasks we do every day? And so when someone goes through this class, they're going to get a good feel for how to look at their job, or the job that, let me back up. They're going to get a feel for how their job can be most efficiently done. They're going to get a new perspective in terms of how they utilize equipment or labor or any process, any materials. The main takeaway is just a new perspective on how to look at their processes.
Now, why is process improvement important for landfills, Neal?
Well, the key with process improvement applied to landfills is twofold. First, landfills, like most other activities in the waste industry, have repetitive tasks where we may do the same thing. We may push trash or compact trash or cover trash literally tens of thousands of times over the life of the landfill. So those repetitive tasks, anytime we see someone doing the same thing over and over and over, it indicates that there's an opportunity for small savings to be turned into massive savings when you add those up over the course of many years. The other reason that we like to use process improvement for landfills is the sheer value of the landfill's airspace. Key thing to keep in mind, for landfills, airspace is the most important commodity. In fact, it's generally the only commodity that a landfill has. And there's a tremendous value to that airspace. Well, most of the repetitive tasks that we do at landfills contribute to how we use that airspace, how we utilize our airspace. And so the more efficient we can become, not only do we save money and we may be able to reduce equipment wear and labor costs, but we also are increasing the useful life of that landfill. So for landfills, process improvement is very important because it saves money and helps reduce the drain on resources, but it also extends landfill life.
Now, what inefficiencies are pretty common in transfer operations? Say, for how long would it take to implement a solution to that inefficiency as well?
Well, in waste collections, some of the most common inefficiencies are related to routing. We find a lot of variability out there, something that you'll hear over and over through these sessions. Variation in any system, in any process, typically indicates a problem. It indicates an inefficiency. For example, if we have a route where one driver can run the entire route in 6 hours, but we have another driver who can run that same route in 5 hours, well, there's variation. Or if we have one driver that runs a route in 6 hours one day and 8 hours next week, and the following week runs that same route in 4.5 hours, that kind of variation typically indicates a problem. What we want to see is consistency. So in a collections operation, some of the problems that we find there are related to variation. And from that regard, or from that perspective, it's important to have good data. Typically, when we look at collections operations, we want to have good data in terms of what's the average tonnage per load to the transfer station or to the landfill. Oh, my screen just went black again. Hold on. So in terms of collections operations, it's always important to have good data. We want to know how many tons per load does a truck bring into a landfill or a transfer station on average? Or how long does it take to run a route on average? Are certain days of the week longer than others? What are the variables in that? And it's that variation that indicates where there may be some problems.
Now, what are some of the key opportunities that you've identified for process improvement for waste diversion operations?
Well, in terms of process improvement for waste diversion operations, one of the key questions to be answered is, what's the goal? We find some waste recycling facilities, some material recovery facilities, we find some MRFs actually don't have clear goals. They aren't clear as to whether their goal is to recycle as much as possible or recycle commodities that are the most cost-effective. Fact is, some recyclables cannot be recycled or diverted cost-effectively. In other words, they have to be subsidized, or the cost has to be subsidized from someplace else. So establishing those goals is really important. And then for some material recovery facilities, let's talk about, for example, a pick line, where we have people actually standing at a conveyor extracting specific types of recyclables from a flow of waste or mixed recyclables that are coming across a conveyor line. When we talk about a pick line, there is so much repetitive action. Generally, we find that an individual working on a pick line might make 40 or 50 picks per minute, almost one a second. And when you multiply that out, you find that they could be making millions of picks or millions of individual extractions of certain commodities every year. When you see that number of repetitive activities, it indicates that there's a huge potential cumulative benefit if you can make those things as efficient as possible. So recycling facilities, material recovery facilities offer huge opportunities because of the sheer volume or the number of repetitions for the task that we commonly see there.
Mm-hmm. And Neal, in your estimation, what are some of the biggest process mistakes that companies make?
Well, they get into a set pattern. Some of the biggest mistakes are related to being set in a fixed way of doing things without ever stepping back, trying to get a different perspective, and see if the current process makes sense. Is it the most efficient way to do that? Because, again, we all learn to do things a certain way. We get into the habit of doing it the same way every time. And in some cases, we find that we may do some of those tasks hundreds or even thousands of times per year. And if we're not efficient with those, we're missing the boat. We're wasting money. We're wasting resources. And so the biggest mistakes that we see is just not stepping back and giving a critical look to the processes that we do every day.
Now, you've consulted with other companies before. How much have these companies saved by implementing your process improvement tools?
Well, let me give you an example on what a recent landfill client saved. We did an operational review, process improvement analysis for a landfill in California, and when we were finished, that facility saved the first year about $4 million, including almost $1 million of revenue from selling equipment or machines that weren't being used. So the first year they saved about $4 million, and we're projecting that they'll save about $2 million per year going forward. So it's a significant potential savings. And just by the way, the total budget for that facility was about $12 million a year. So first year they knocked almost a third of their budget off, and going forward they're going to be taking off about 17% a year of their normal operating budget. So the savings can be pretty significant.
And finally, Neal, why would you recommend attending this particular series?
Well, this series is based on things that we've seen over the past 30 years or so, and I, like everyone else, typically started off doing my work in a way where I learned to do a specific task based on how someone told me to do it. And we do it the same way that we've always done it. So this particular series is going to help us reevaluate a lot of different aspects, and our focus will be on the waste industry. So we'll be looking at a lot of different applications for process improvement, and the key thing that we'll find here for attendees that look at this class, or the key thing that attendees will take away from this class, will be a new perspective on how to look at all of the tasks that they do over and over again, those repetitive tasks, and look for ways to be more efficient. They'll just have a different perspective. When they come to work, they'll look at those tasks in a different perspective.